All right, welcome to the Train Smart podcast with Velox Training Group. I am Nick Young, the host and lead instructor of Velox Training Group. We've got Max Gates back again. He took a little hiatus because he had
I
to.
took a trip to China is what I did.
Yes, adult things
That's a
for his job.
hiatus.
It is. But yeah, glad you're back. And I think we've got a pretty interesting podcast today. I'm hoping so anyway. So we've got Jake Labhart from In Extremis Performance. Jake, tell the people who you are, what you do, and all that jazz.
Oh yeah, I don't know how long of a story to go here, but yeah. So I'm the owner of In Extremis Performance. We train primarily special operations units. I would say that's probably 95% of our classes that we teach. What brought us into the industry was a hyper focus on human performance. So I've got my doctorate. I've got a guy on my team that has masters, and some different, I would say, pretty qualified individuals from the human performance realm. We started working with federal special operations units and coming in and saying, hey, how do we make you more efficient as an operator? Not an operator, but like operating at your job, because I know people freak out about that word.
I'm pretty operator, Jake.
Hey, you know what? Hey, you operate a gun really well. I'm down calling you an operator, just, But no, so we came in and really hyper focused on human performance, and that's being done in a lot of the military special operations, as well as law enforcement.
Mhm.
But I think where we really bridged the gap was bringing the gun into it. I think that we started just as strength and conditioning coaches in the professional athlete realm, are in there working on feet work, and they're working on all these different mechanics of how to make the athlete move more efficiently and perform at a higher level. That's what we started doing. I started dabbling in shooting. I was prior military, so like I had shot before, but I hadn't like shot before. And so I went out there, started running around shooting, and I was okay. I went to a Ben and Matt class and kind of got a deeper dive and understanding of like really how to train or what to look at. And then from there, I just kind of ran with it of how do I apply body mechanics and human performance on the movement side, similarly to how a lot of you guys are approaching it, and vision, grip, and all those different things. And so, yeah, now we travel the country teaching, mostly law enforcement. Honestly, this past year was very, very largely on the federal side, but we still teach local classes as well.
Very cool. Yeah, you've been to places that I am going soon.
That is correct. That is correct. I keep hearing your name pop up at places I'm either going or they're like, oh yeah, Nick's coming right before you, and I'm like, oh nice, good to hear. Yeah, so it's that is a very small world, as you know, but it's cool, man. It's been neat opportunities for sure.
Awesome. So I'm curious, would you say an In Extremis class is a shooting class, or would it be a movement class, or is it like
Gosh,
what
dang,
is
guy,
it?
going with the hard questions out the gate. All right,
Oh, dude,
I dig it.
that's nothing.
No, I know. I'm just playing with you. It's actually a great question, because I think that's how we've kind of separated ourselves. I don't think I'm a bad shooter, but I don't think I'm Nick Young shooter either. But what I am really good at is, and to answer that question, I think how a lot of people articulate it back to us is like, this is a movement course that has shooting versus a shooting course that has movement, right?
Okay.
I didn't create movement. Like I think
Sure.
we have a lot of people push on us like, oh man, y'all are the movement guys, and I appreciate that. I think early on I wanted to identify as subject matter experts in an area. But I think that as we've grown and that message has kind of refined itself, I think there's a lot of you guys that have movement in your class. Like, you're an excellent mover and shooter, right? We come into the club, when people come to our class, though, we dive deep into mechanics of movement and then backfill with, here's where the shooting comes into that. Here's why movement is important to your shooting, right? The whole point is to shoot faster and more accurate. Okay, well, how does your movement mechanics impact that? And so that is kind of, I would say, how I would articulate that. It's a movement class that has shooting versus a shooting class that has movement. Primary, secondary, if you will.
I like it. Where are there any sort of influences that you've had on movement? Like maybe you used to do that. Maybe you were a football player, like whatever. I know, like you mentioned, you had a doctorate. What were some of the influences in regards to like how you do movement or maybe even how you teach movement these days?
Yeah, it's a great question. I did play Division I football. My brother played in the NFL. So we played a lot of sports growing up. So I would say, yes, I would assume that football played a background in that.
Mhm.
However, whenever I got into the military and then I got out, got my doctorate, I went back to USASOC specifically, where they were doing they're bringing all these human performance specialists. And I saw a lot of strength coaches coming over from the NFL world specifically. And I saw some good things, but I also saw some negative things to where they were trying to make them football players instead of like truly understanding what is the job, role, responsibility of an operator. And I mean operator in the real operator sense for all of you people are going to freak out, right? So I saw that shift that was happening. One of the limiting factors, and I said this on live with Matt, and so one of those guys, not one of the specific guys, but one of the other medical people like reached out to me like, hey, I shoot, and I'm like, okay, guy, not everybody, but I saw a big gap in they did not understand shooting. They did not understand what the end user was actually doing because they didn't do it. They weren't going out on rucks. They weren't going out to the drop zone. They weren't going into shoot house. So I think it's been a journey, man, like all of us, right? Even in your shooting journey. It's not like you walked out there and saw somebody shoot and then pissed excellence and understood the process. So I think for me, yes, absolutely playing Division I sports was a pretty big impact in my life. How I trained growing up. Yes, a doctorate helped me really understand the biomechanics, helped me understand physiology to really look at and say, okay, well, why is a drop step good or bad? Right? Like, what is the impact? What is the gain or what is the negative there? Like, I can tell you from a physiological level where a lot of people are just like, it's bad, you're wasting time. Well, it's got a shortening, lengthening reflex that actually generates more power. So is it bad? Like, there's a time and place for a lot of things, right? So I think that there's the education side, but then honestly, man, just the journey. I mean, I've had a lot of people influence, even from the competition world, right? Like, I'm not a big competition shooter. I enjoy going shooting when I can, but competition movement like JJ Rakaza, like versus like tactical world unknown. I can walk the stage and look at it. And I don't mean I'm not like until they start shooting back at you. I don't mean like that. I mean like you can walk the stage and look at it. You can get away with certain movements because you can plan it versus an unknown, right? You can't plan for that. So your body has to be prepped and ready differently. And so there's just been a lot of things, man, that's influenced my movement. And as I've kind of looked at it and trained train with different guys so I can look at how you guys move, right? Because that was a movement that I didn't train. Y'all rarely go to a max effort movement, right? It's generally a sub max effort. And what I mean by that, not as like you're half-assing it, but 75% versus 100% is going to come in your dots and be so loud you may not be ready. So it's just been a journey, man. I cannot identify specifically one thing, to be honest with you.
Okay. All right.
Sorry, super long answer. Probably not what you're looking for, but
no.
There's a lot there.
You actually said a bunch of things that I kind of want to play on here in a second, but I think the next question I find kind of interesting, and this is what I'm going to start asking every single instructor that comes on the podcast, because I think it's really important.
Cool.
What are you currently working on in your own training, and how does that affect not only your training? That's obviously going to affect your training, right? But like, how does that affect the classes that you teach? Like, are you trying to do it to gain a higher understanding of what you're currently working on? Are you like constantly changing curriculum because of what you're working on, et cetera?
Great question. I mean, I think it's an excellent question. You should ask all instructors, because if you can't answer that question, in my opinion, that's a hard stop, not for the conversation, but like you're halting your career.
Well, yeah. Those guys who can't answer that probably won't make it on the show anyway.
Probably so. So not to be cliche or just like too simple here, but like movement, to be very honest with you. Some of the units that we're kind of referring to that called me were like, hey man, we're bringing Nick Young out. We're great at shooting. What I want, like hard only movement. And I'm like, cool. Like that's my jam. I can do that. Right. However, I've restructured some classes for some of those units that maybe have more availability to train and or feel at least like they're good on the shooting side, to where it is like, I mean, aggressive 8 to 5 movement. In that though, like I think I'm pretty good at shooting and moving, but I want to be like piss excellence. And just like we talk about with doubles, the exploratory phase of the input you're putting into the gun, there's things that I'm still continuing to learn on the movement side, that static, input into the gun versus movement into the input, they are different. Like, because now you have a whole nother plane that you're adding in there with velocity or momentum, if you will.
Sure.
And so this week, which is hilarious, right before we got on here, I just so happened to open an Instagram and saw your post about 25 shooting on the move. I am taking, and I'm doing that same concept of really backing out to 25. And I know everybody struggles with this, but like a lot of people that don't shoot rifle consistently, if you're only 15 and in or 10 and in, like I see a lot of the law enforcement community, like you are massively hurting yourself. So I'm taking pistol shooting on the move out to 25 and even rifle 35, 40. Really trying to use what I call an overspeed model, which I'm not trying to steal a term, but that's from the human performance world. But I think a lot of us do it. I'm just kind of defining, and really trying to hyper focus that input from into the gun, but also separate it out into the movement piece. So that's the thing I'm really exploring right now. I'm building out very specific documents to objectively quantify how fast was I moving, what input, what input do I feel like I put into the gun, whether it be a level of confirmation, to what target availability distance, to really come back and almost have like a log, just like we record on our guns, of saying like, hey, this is what I was able to accomplish at this distance, this speed, this, whatever. So just really trying to refine, man. I'm going to go teach at these high levels. So far, I've been successful when I go teach there, that I'm not struggling, but at the same time, like I don't want to stop there. Like I want to continue to learn, because honestly, man, I am super new in this community compared to a lot of you guys. I went to Ben and Matt class, like, not this, but let's see, what year are we? 24, 23, I think April of 23. So my shooting journey is very new, right? And so a lot of this, I kind of just drank through a fire hose, and I relied heavily on, I was Division I running back, so I just moved well naturally. So the shooting side was really where I probably spent the last year to year and a half, like hyper focusing, trying to train with as many people as I can to hear different, I know some of y'all don't like this word, but technique, but also principles, right? Because like I need to understand both of those as a very new and fresh shooter, right?
No, I'm not hating on technique. I mean, techniques are like needed, right? Like I teach techniques in my classes, but I put it in such a way it's like, hey, these are the techniques that are going to supplement these said principles that we just talked about, just as an example. It's funny that you mentioned like that you are recording data or whatever. So like that drill that you were talking about where you saw me shooting on the move, like steel at 25, that's exactly what I did. So what I noticed was I could shoot all of that stuff static, right? It's 2 open targets, 25-yard steel in the middle. I could shoot it static, like I'm not missing. I'm shooting really good points. And as soon as I start moving my feet, I'm like, man, what is happening? And then, so I started noticing, or I started taking note of like what was actually happening. Personally, I think that's what people miss in their training like quite a bit. But what I noticed on that was like when I was standing static, the target focus thing was totally easy. Like it's completely inside of my wheelhouse. Like I'm getting, 35 to 40 transitions from paper to steel, which is pretty sporty.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay, the target focus thing is there, but as soon as I start moving, I feel like my eyes are pulling off of that steel. And so I set that drill up, ran it static a couple times, and I'm like, all right, dummy, that's what I want it to look like when you start shooting on the move. And as soon as I started shooting it on the move and started focusing, like, nope, I want to put bullets right there on the steel. It went very, very well for me. I will say too, like the movement piece, and we'll dive into this a ton, but the movement piece of that facilitated me being able to do that. And like what absolutely. I mean, I figured you would agree with this. So like what I mean is like, if I was like walking like a 10-month-old baby, like we've all seen, like the stiff leg, bouncing around type of deal, like that dot would be bouncing all over the place. And it would be very, very difficult to do the things that I need to do visually to connect on that steel. And so like stepping as softly as possible, like that was a key thing, like coming out of that first position, not only aggressively, but stepping as softly as possible. This way I can have the exact same transition time off of the paper onto that steel, even though I'm moving. So like the movement piece didn't change anything when I was obviously target focused, but stepping really, really softly. So this kind of leads me into the next question. So you teach a lot about movement stuff. What would you say some of like the key principles are for movement? Maybe some big mistakes that people make because they don't know maybe key principles. And as an example, like a key principle for me, like if I'm teaching movement, say I'm teaching entries as an example, like, hey, when you come into a position, like you need to start thinking about quiet feet with the gun up, ready to shoot. And then when you land, you need to be landing with your feet spread like wide apart and your knees bent, right? This sets you up to get out of that position if you need to. So
Yeah, it's a really good question. I was joking with you earlier on the technique thing a little bit, but now that I'm sitting here thinking on it, as you asked me that question, that's a little bit tough because I think that is one of the, and I actually, again, like it literally until this moment right here, because I hear everybody talks about techniques, principles, but as it relates to grip or all these different things. Mm-hmm. But actually, as I'm sitting here thinking, you asked me that question, I think one of the things in my class that we have to go backwards on, we actually teach a lot of technique to give a starting point because so many people's mechanics are either mess. So let me go one more step. One of the things we do in our classes, we even go no gun of just trying to help them understand how to move as a athlete. So one of the guys that teaches with me, usually he's got his master's in exercise science. He coaches the Division I football level. We have really, really good data in the special operations community. About 76% of them have played at a minimum a high school sport. Okay, minimum high school sport and lettered. And so although that is a good thing because there's some level of athleticism there, that also means for the majority of them, they have not heard anything sport specific taught in probably at least 10 years, probably significantly more than that. So we have to go backwards and almost do a starting point of learning that athleticism piece, right? Because if I told all three of us to go and we're going to do a 10-yard sprint, to a 40-yard sprint, to a pro agility, I don't know the last time that either one of you ran any of those three tests, but I have a feeling that we are going to look very different, right? And I'm not knocking either one of you. I'm just saying, like I've taught it, but two, I've trained it very specifically at least at one point in my life. Mm-hmm. Those mechanics make a significant impact and difference because if you don't have that at the starting piece, everything after that is going to get very difficult. In terms of the principle, so I say that to say, there's a lot of things we have to teach as an example, as a starting stance, right? Just like on the grip, right? Hey guys, here is a way to do it. Here's a starting point. From there, like all three of us are different heights. So our stance is going to look a little bit different, but here are the fundamentals, the principles that we want to have is a good forward backwards base width, right? So, and I give it a little bit more context to that. And then per that, how does your body respond? If you're too tall and you feel your body have to drop down into this weird, okay, your body was not ready, right? So I haven't broke it down into principles like that is a longer answer to say that's a really good question. And maybe that is something we should do. I think so much of our class is foreign to people that we have to start with some techniques to get them to understand. But from there are things like, I would say, as I'm just off the fly here, which I've said before, but now I'm just trying to relate it back to principles like throttle control, right? Helping people understand there is a time to throttle up and a time to throttle down. If I've got a 10+ yard movement, that throttle speed, I can drastically go upwards. So like separating my hands on the gun because I'm going to be faster pumping my arm. In addition to some of my deceleration techniques are going to have to change versus a 3-yard movement. I probably need to keep both hands on the gun. So my grip's pre-built-ish. Right. So throttle control, I would say, is a big one. Visual prioritization. I think just like we work, it's interesting to me whenever I teach a class, I will ask them like, hey, on a reload, bam, mag goes down, mag comes in, I get on the gun. Where am I to that process?
Dude, always look at the threat, Jake.
Bro, how many people still say that? It's wild to me how many people, but like, dude, like, honest to goodness, I would say probably 75% of the class still says that. And
Dude.
so then and I'm not there. It won't ever die. I agree. And which is fine. This is where like I try not to go like too deep into the science piece, but like, anyway, I go from that to like, hey, so we do the same thing in movement, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a very well-known instructor that posted a video, them running a long lateral movement, and they were peak, 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 back and forth, back and forth. Where I'm moving, target. Where I'm moving, target. Where I'm moving, target.
Well,
it was getting a lot
of say the name because now I want to go look.
No, I'm not gonna say the name, but it was one of those things where they posted it. They were getting a lot of love, a lot of all this comments, and I was like, dude, I just it's like eating me inside of like it's just wrong, right? And so I left one comment more so just asking for clarification, just so I could understand. Maybe I'm missing something. The response, they just DM'd me directly right after that, which I didn't mind. And I said, yeah, man, I'd love to get on a call. So we got on a call and talked, and they were. Long story short, they didn't know what the right answer was. And then they started asking me, which I appreciated, of like, hey, well, then what's your opinion? I gave them my opinion, but essentially visual prioritization. Dude, in that moment, if you're not choosing to shoot, you've chosen that something else is a higher priority.
Sure.
Look where you're going, right? Now, again, there's caveats. If it's a 3-yard movement and all I need is a peek and I need to be back on the gun, I'm dig it. But this was like a 20-yard movement. The response back to me was, I can't teach people to do that because they're not good enough shooters and they come into position too fast when they do that. And I want them to be on the gun sooner. And so there's things like that I hear that, again, going back to your principles concept, we want to be on the gun sooner, right? Okay, well, how do we do that? There's mechanics involved, specifically the visual prioritization. I don't know if this is a principle, but I think this is literally this comes back to technique. I think a lot of people have not heard of this is how I enter a position in the competition world, but really just how do I decelerate appropriately in terms of how my body's created, what different things that I have going on. Now I have a gun in my hand, right? A lot of people, one of the common things I hear in classes from other instructors is, you've been walking for 30 years, you're fine, don't think about it.
Dude, I hate that. I hate that so much. Like, that's like nails on a chalkboard to me. Like, and they're like, hey, movement is like, hey, just walk. And I'm thinking, dude, every time I've shot a match, it looks nothing like how I would fucking walk around my house.
Dude, and I've heard that from not one, not two, but numerous special operations guys in the space teaching movement. And I'm like, there is such a massive disconnect. They're either at such a low level that they think that that's what all the high speed dudes do. They're at such a low level that they have
for sure
not enough knowledge because they haven't gone and explored. There's just so many things there. But I go back to, in our class we have to teach a lot of techniques, but it's like the fundamentals, honestly, of movement, right? Of like, this is what a loaded position looks like. The reason that whenever you come in, you need to sink your hips under so your chest comes up so you can see. When do you start marrying the hands, get on the gun sooner? So yeah, and I'm sorry, I don't have specific principles, but there's a lot there. And that's where it's interesting you asked that question, because it almost does. It makes me come back to like, I feel like our class is for a lot of people is a new concept that we do have to start off with some techniques to set those fundamentals.
Well, see, I think there's a distinction. We're trying to stay away from this technique idea. There's a distinction between technique and gimmick, right? I think anybody starting at zero with anything, even if you have set principles, I mean, you should have principles, and you have principles.
Yeah.
You want to accomplish a certain goal, right? Anybody starting from zero, if you tell them to do this certain thing, they're going to look at you with a blank look, right? You have to give them something to start with. And, I think, Nick, you'd agree, when we teach guys who've been shooting for a really, really long time, right, we don't have to give them new techniques, or we certainly don't get into the world of gimmicks. You get to tweak what they already have because they have a frame of reference for how to get to something.
Right.
If you're starting from zero, they have no frame of reference. You have to have some sort of technique to at least give them somewhere to start. I think the cuss word is when we start getting into gimmicks. And I mean, that's I think people they give people techniques and they call them techniques, but they're really gimmicks. There's absolutely space in the world for good techniques. Everybody has
Sure.
their own techniques to get to somewhere. It's really, when I think you're when you can call yourself advanced is when you know how to distinguish a gimmick from a technique and distinguish what sort of techniques work for you. So I don't think technique is a cuss word. I think it is. It's an important thing, especially for people who have no frame of reference for some.
That's a great call out. No, you're right. And I was kind of joking early but I agree with you. Now I'm not trying to make it as exactly cuss word. I love that actually, or curse word. Yeah, I think what's tough is for some people, you don't know what you don't know, right? I think the last piece is really, really important. An advanced shooter can understand and look at which one's a gimmick and which one's a technique, right? Whereas I think, yeah, so even I see it on the movement side, right? I know y'all see it a lot on the shooting side, which I'm now to a place where I can also see it on the shooting side. But dude, it's what I've told y'all, like within we'll call it 2 years, for a long time on my true shooting journey. Some of those gimmicks, it's important to hear so I can hear other things that are out there that I can start processing and looking at and being like, something feels off. Something inside my tummy doesn't feel right. You know what I mean? It's just like I tell my kids, hey man, if walking down that dark alley doesn't feel right and something inside your tummy feels weird, walk around the block. Don't just be like, you know what? I think I'm going to take the shortcut. And then you get jumped and then be like, I don't know what happened. Right. I think that, unfortunately, in the world of social media, that's really hard because there's so many great ways to put things out that you don't know. But here's what I'll say. Here's what I will say. I still blame the end user. If you don't go out and play with it and try it and explore, you are just as much in this process of ownership as the person selling the snake oil, right? And so, yeah, it's been So I think it's a great call. I completely agree.
Yeah, I would blame the end user as well. But as this is kind of redirecting just for a second, I think as I guess you call it training community, we've done a really bad job over the years of just telling people hey, do it like this and it'll be really good. Add pinky pressure, the gun won't move. Just weird shit that's you tell people this stuff and they don't have any clue as to how to assess it, right? They just go, oh, that guy said to do this, I'm going to go do it. And then they never know why it doesn't work out for them because they don't know specific principles in terms of how to actually go train it. I think we've done a really bad job of that, at least in the past. So.
Oh yeah, no, I think we're on a train right now that, I feel like even more so on the end user. I feel like if you feel like you can just go and be like, well, they just told me and I didn't know any better, that, I feel like we're in a world now where it's very much no, you should be self-exploring and finding out yourself. And again, not 100% on the end user. I think also from our instructor world, but at the same time, I think we're very much in a world there's been a big shift of you got to go learn for yourself, because I've, for me, even when I took Ben and Matt's class, I'm not trying to say that they did or didn't, because I do not remember, but I don't remember a specific technique on grip being given. I remember it being more principle based, right? Which now obviously I know Matt very well. Matt's a good friend, so I know his principles around grip, which I appreciate. Back then, those were just words to me, right? I was just like, man, I'm just holding this gun and hoping for the best. You know what I mean? Got it. Consistency, stability, and repeatability. No, durability. Sorry, durability. And I'm like, yep, those are words in the English dictionary, but how to put that on my gun, I have no idea what it, right? And then it was like, hey, let's shoot predictive doubles, and be like, well, this is an ass whooping. I'm not sure how many rounds I just threw into the sky, but and so I needed some of those techniques, right? I needed to understand what the pinky pressure was, and if it's possible for me to accomplish that, do that and go play with it and be like, okay, that's not for me, but at the same time, it at least is a starting point. And so I think there's just, again, you have to take the time and go do it yourself. And then from there, make your own decision. And I do think we're in a world where if you are that person that's just like, oh, that's how they told me to do it, which unfortunately, as much as I would like to, and both of you as well, I still go into departments and be like, well, that's how they taught me. And I'm like, okay, well, that's as much as your fault as theirs. So yeah, but I think we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, dude, I whenever people leave like any of our classes, like the main thing that I want them to take away is like, hey, when you guys are training, the biggest thing is to pay attention and to pay attention to very specific things. So in other words, like as an example, maybe I told you like as you're shooting, I can see you watching the dot lift. So like if I told you that or Max told you that a couple times, like that's something that you should be like really, really working on when you leave here, because there's not a great chance of you getting over that and changing that behavior in classes. So like just getting people like keyed into like, hey, when you go out and train, you really need to be trying to assess, specific behaviors that you are trying to change, right? And then in your dry fire stuff, like really, really leaning into specific things in terms of behaviors that you don't want anymore.
Well, and it's changed. I mean, it's changed in the last 5 years, even in how we're teaching and addressing students on the line. I mean, we have, I don't know, a half dozen drills in our classes that they're focused not on what your results are, but they're asking you to focus on what's happening to get those results. And where 5 years ago, we'd have been walking along the line and adjusting somebody's grip just because it didn't look, right. I don't want to say 5 years ago, maybe 8 years ago.
Yeah.
We'd have been adjusting people's grip and things like that. Now it's asking them different questions. It's asking them about what they're seeing, regardless of how their grip is. Unless something is egregiously awful. If someone is standing up there with a, holding a Glock with a revolver grip, but they're seeing the things that they need to see and the gun's doing the things that they need it to do, we're going to have a conversation about it.
Yeah, 100%.
We're asking very different questions now. I think that cult of personality is what drives a lot of those weird, holding on to gimmicks and things like that. Certainly in the training world. I don't know how that applies really to the law enforcement world, where they're really, it's a job for them. The guy at work told them this is how they do it, as opposed to the guy they paid $300 to go spend 8 hours with.
Oh, dude, so it's actually worse in law enforcement.
I'm sure it is.
It's worse. Like
it's tough.
You'll hear guys say all the time, like, "Wait a minute, you're running by those barrels, like you're blowing your cover, something like that, something to that effect." And it's like, yeah, dude, that's a 55-gallon drum, bro. That's not fucking cover, man. Like,
it's a visual
and they're
barrier.
like, well, I don't want to train like that. It's like, dude, you have to let some of this stuff go. Like I oftentimes think it's worse in law enforcement.
Bro, I was with a very large full-time SWAT team in the country. And I had someone come up to me after class and told me that, and mind you, I just finished 2 days with them teaching. And they told me that they almost did not listen to me after the first day because I did not scan and look left, look right, look left, or look right. And I was just like, and I honestly, and I had asked everybody in front of the class, like, hey, if there's anything, like I want to continue to learn, right? And nobody said anything. So again, I go to my truck and I'm packing up all my gear, and they came over, and that's what they told me. And I was just kind of like, okay. It's one of those moments, like, if you're not going to listen to me,
Jake, you can send it. Just
like,
send it.
No, I know,
Tell us
bro.
what
Like,
you mean.
it's just one of those things where I was just like, you've got to be kidding me right now, guy. Like,
yeah.
I just, and it's not even a me versus them thing. Like, there's people that come in and dust me, but I am dusting them like we shouldn't be on the same range at this point, kind of thing, and I'm kind of kidding, but I'm kind of not, right? And you're telling me you almost didn't listen to me because of a range theatric. And it's one of those things where, like, the worst part is when these guys are doing this, and it was not all of them, just to clarify, this team's big enough, there's multiple teams, there's different personalities between the teams. Dude, they're yanking their head around like I could have put a massive atomic bomb over there and they would not have identified it. You know what I mean? Like, they're just doing it for range theatrics. So then they come up and tell me at the end, I'm just like, okie dokie, guys. So to Nick's point, to you, Max, like it can be rough. And I will say this though. This is again blessing and a curse, right? On the movement side, I think it's so foreign. We do not get crazy amount of pushback. Not saying that I want crazy amount of pushback. I do think we've done a very good job of how we roll it out, we present it, and we teach it. The other thing that's super helpful though for us on the movement side, which you can do on the shooting side as well, but we encourage guys like video yourself, video everything that we're doing so that you can see what we're doing, so you can see what you're doing, and we can identify different things in your movement, right? So that you better understand the concepts or principles that we're trying to apply. So you see where this movement mechanic, you could not get on the gun sooner because of XYZ, right? And so I do think that that's been something really good in our class because we allow people to video each other and or us. And so it's been kind of interesting on the learning side to where people can very directly see it and then go apply it. And then the biofeedback of it, right, would be that then they go focus on that movement and then they immediately see, ooh, my dot is quieter. Boom, I shoot sooner. Ah, success, right? And so I don't want to say there's an easier or more direct trickle down effect to success, because I still agree, is something I've heard a lot of us have talked about in the shooting community. In a 2-day class, you're showing up with what you got. Right? Like you're not gonna leave and be a GM, right? If you showed up as an A-class shooter. And so even on the movement side, however, because we train it in very specific motor patterns, it's not like your body doesn't have these at all that you've never walked before. We're just refining and helping the body understand what those motor patterns are, which is why our class is built in a very specific progression. And by the end, subjectively, just so we're all on the same page for the listener, objectively is fact, right? Nick shot a tenth faster than Jake did. Max shot a tenth faster than both, right? That's objective, like no questions asked, right? Sorry, 5 seconds faster. No, I'm just kidding. But subjectively would be like, you know what? Nick looked better during that movement, but they don't have a grading scale, right? Subjectively, a lot of people in our class report like, ooh, I felt better in that movement. Well, I can visually watch you and be like, yeah, no, I would completely agree with that. These mechanics are better, right? So yes, we can notice different because all we're building specific motor patterns. The people that see more gains in our classes, this comes back to why I think movement's so important. If you want to go CQB expert operator, right? What Matt and I have talked on this before. CQB, I've got a Venn diagram, movement, shooting, decision-making, 3 circles, right? That overlap to, hey, CQB, amazing. Listen, if you show up to our class and you're already great at shooting, that's one of those things that can be in the subconscious. Where all you have to focus on in my class is like hyper-focus on input on the movement side, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully you can do both of those and they can run in the subconscious well, so you can really focus on decision-making. People ask me like, well, I don't think about my movement. I'm not trying to start an issue here, but because I don't know if Matt is even going to listen to this, but the Orion training group guys put the little marks down on the floor, right? And people ask me all the time of like, well, they're doing feet work. And I'm like, yeah, we do feet work, but I'm teaching you how to have better body awareness motor patterns feet work that's going to allow you to not have to have little footprints on the ground, right? I understand that is a technique that they use, but that is not how I would do it, right? Matt has said on lives before, like, hey, Jake's feet work is how to be more athletic. That's what we need you to be so you can move through a house appropriately, right? The movement's in the background, not I have to think consciously of like my foot goes here to here as a step center, right? So just to clarify, but all that to say, movement, everybody moves subconsciously for the most part, but it's on a tiered scale, right? The shittier you move, you're going to get to a point, especially like points of domination as an example, if you're a one man, and you have to go to that support side and you're going 2 corners and your body's like, why can't I move anymore? Okay, well, I remember that red shirt told me never cross my feet, but I got to get to my point of domination. And your brain's like, F you, dude. Like, what? Move. And you're like, I can't. They told me not to. You see what I'm saying? Like, your brain gets in this battle, even in the subconscious. So we try to come in and understand these are the movement patterns you need so it can better move in the subconscious. So that's been kind of one of the big breakthroughs, in my opinion, as we look at the shooting as it pertains to movement in operational skill.
I think that goes back to, The guys who come and say like, I'm not listening to you because you aren't searching and assessing. I think, and it goes back to what you were saying earlier too, Jake. It's all a sport, right? I mean, everything is a sport. Everything, if you treat it like a sport, you're going to excel at it, right? And in any athletic endeavor, isolating these things, isolating these individual skills is the only way to get better at them.
Yep.
And
that's an important piece a lot of people don't understand, though.
Yeah. Oh, that's what I'm saying. I mean, it's the guys who cannot divorce the shooting from the moving, or the, I don't know, running footwork drills from catching a pass, to batting practice from base running. I mean, it's everything. Yeah. The guys who can't divorce these things and are trying to do everything at once are the guys who aren't going to figure out how to do the individual skills. To your point, and Nick and I talk about this a lot, especially in classes, because we are coming at it. We do movement, but we're coming at it from the isolating shooting skills, especially in 1 day, 2 day classes. And it is, you have to isolate these things, or you're not going to get better at it. If you're trying to think about what your feet are doing while you're also trying to think about what your gun is doing, you're not going to do either of them well. You have to be one of them has to be out of your mind while you're doing the other, or you're not going to improve at the thing you're trying to improve at. And I think that's where, like, I think it manifests in the, well, I stopped listening because you weren't searching and assessing. I think that's how it manifests, right. But I think it's a symptom of guys who just can't divorce. Look, you're learning a skill here. You're going to apply this skill to these other things later, but right now you're learning a skill.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, man, you're 100%. And I think that, so the other piece that obviously we have on ours and what we teach is that's different from the shooting side. We all have range work, right? So the go confirm or validate the stuff you've been doing in dry fire. We both have dry fire, right? Even on the movement side, right? Understanding target focus in your dry fire as it pertains to movement. Well, the next step that we have on our side is also the gym, right? What are you doing outside of anything with a gun in your hand? And the people that, it's not specifically a gym. I'm not saying CrossFit or go lift. I care less about that. Are you actually moving without a gun in your hand?
You're getting ahead of me, Jake.
It's the guys on the treadmill.
Getting ahead of me.
It's the guys.
I got that as a question.
It's the guys on the treadmill with the bar on their shoulder, pretending it's a gun.
Oh, bro.
On the treadmill. It's those guys.
Yeah. Train like you fight, 100%.
I prefer to use rubber bands and then point the gun, like Instructor Zero. I think that's the best.
Oh yeah. Well, time and place for everything, right? Time and place for everything.
No.
Not the time or the place.
So, all right. So basically this entire podcast is on like how to train specifically, right? Like I want people to be able to listen to this and be like, okay, I need to go work on that. Or this guy said, this is something that I should be working on or looking at in my training. So if we're talking about entries and exits, and this is a very broad question, so you could take it for what it's worth, answer it how you want. If we're talking about entries and exits, what are a couple very key things that maybe you see people miss a lot and they need to be working on, not only in their dry fire, but in their live fire as well? And how would they assess it if, like, in other words, how would they assess it and deem it like good or bad?
Yeah, good if it's working or not, or just assessment in general, find out. Yeah, it's a pretty complex question. Let me break it down a little bit. But so exits, I think one of the things is, again, so I do want to clarify, because I think that this is a common question I get, but also I see in my class. What are we training for? What is that exit supposed to mimic, or what would be the application, right? So this is a difference in competition versus real world, right? Tactical, whatever we want to call that, operational side, whatever verbiage, right? No, but really I identify it as known versus unknown movement, right? Now, in a training environment, it is going to still be known, right? I'm telling you to run 7 yards to your right. However, the setup, generally how I tell somebody is like, hey, if you were just standing there and I was going to come and all of a sudden I was just going to tackle you, but you saw it, what would your body do? And they drop down and they're like into that athletic stance, right, where they're loaded. Okay. That's generally kind of like an unknown. My body, more than likely, if an officer was going to get into a shooting, that's where they're going to be. They don't know specifically which direction they're going to have to move yet, but that's a solid starting point. Versus in a competition setting, if I can set up a really good stage plan and I can go, partial open, and I can fall out on an open target and I'm already leaving, those are obviously different application. So in terms of exit, specifically from a body mechanics, I know that like Eric Graffel and there's different guys that shoot tall, is what I would call it. And I think I've heard it articulated that way. Here's the thing I'm going to say. From a biomechanical standpoint, if you are shooting tall, it is physically impossible for you to generate power without lowering your body. Because if your muscles are elongated and they're in a position where they cannot overlap and then contract, your body's going to have to drop down. Now, again, if we're talking falling out of position, yeah, I guess you could be tall, fall and onto a contracted leg on specifically at the knee and the hip. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I guess technically, but that would not be my ideal in terms of your body's not in a stable shooting platform. And just to clarify, like Eric Graffel and those guys are not shooting tall in the sense that they're completely straight, flamingo locked out, right? And honestly, when I watch Eric Graffel, like in terms of social media, the guys have sent me videos from like his class and demos. Again, we all use tall. It's a very relative word, right? Well, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think the biggest thing with that is like people run with it, just like they do his grip or anyone's grip for that matter, right? Like they run with the grip, and it's like, man, you really think that's why he's winning? I don't. Right. I think it's a vast area of other things of like what he's doing in practice to actually win those matches. But anyway,
even that, I tell people like Michael Jordan, greatest basketball player of all time. Dude, there's things that Michael Jordan, I'm probably not going to teach my fourth grader when he's starting off playing basketball. Like I would rather teach him like what is the core fundamental thing that we really need to be starting off with before we start, hey, you know what? Your body's different than this other person's over here, right? So anyway, Eric Graffel, greatest right now, I guess, if you want to say that. Sure. Like, yeah, there's things where like, I just don't know if the rest of us should be doing that. Right? I think we should be focusing on like what are the really fundamental things from a biomechanical standpoint. That's where I approach it. So in terms of an exit, again, I want to see generation of power. I don't want to see extra. So it's not so much a false step. What a lot of people call a false step, I would call a plyo step. There's times, in my opinion, where a plyo step is effective. So you watch an NFL receiver, they get up on the line, you'll see kind of that back leg kick and pop. That's a plyo step. It's generating higher power output by that shortening, lengthening reflex versus a false step to me is somebody who's put themselves in a shitty position. So their body's like, dude, I don't have any other option except to now do a quote unquote plyo step. But again, a plyo step is not a plyo step. And what I mean by that is if my body's straight up in a weird, bad position versus if my body's already down loaded and they both do plyo step, well, I'm still going to be in a better position than the down loaded. Does that make sense?
Oh, 1000%. Yeah. Yeah. So the plyo step, would you say that would be like a drop step? I'm just trying to give people a visual of what that would look like.
Yes. If you're trying to visualize it, yes. Now it's a little more technical than that. It is not that clear cut, but yes, that is what most people call a drop step is going to be a plyo step. It's just going to be, again, how far back is your leg kicking to go into that drop or that plyo step, right? There's variables to it or what's what I'm looking for. I'll say there's different variables that can make it more or less efficient. How about that?
Yeah. Well, I think there's, if it's how it's applied and if it's applied correctly too. And I'm sure Jake, there's a lot of technical language around this too, and I was guilty of this. Leaving a position very early on, what I thought was a drop step, but I was essentially just shuffling my feet to reorient myself in a different direction, right? And it was not an effective drop step. I wasn't using it to generate power. I was essentially just shuffling my feet to reorient in a different direction. I wasn't pushing off a drop step.
Yep.
An effective drop step, a useful drop step, can be an important tool when I think done right. I just wasn't doing it. I think of, this is a departure, but like I swam through high school and I spent a month or so working on my start, and I did a false lean back to push to explode forward, and I had a really powerful start, but it was slower than hell. I was the last guy off the blocks. I went far as hell, and I came off hard, but I was the last guy off the blocks. developing it into where I was like leaving the blocks quickly and powerfully was, I mean, it took me a month of dedicated work to get there. And I think that's that's the difference between a useful drop step, plyo step, whatever you want to call it, and just shuffling your feet around.
Man, I think like where I would use that, or where like the context in which I would use that drop step thing, is if my shoulders are leaning in the opposite direction of where I'm about to go.
Yeah.
So in other words, like leaning around a wall or leaning around whatever barricade, and there's a fault line there, and I have to lean. So in other words, my shoulders are leaning in the opposite direction of where I'm about to go. And I think it's a very efficient way to get out of that position, because otherwise, like then you end up having to like really stand tall and just kind of shove yourself forward, and you're not coiled up enough to go in the direction that you're trying to go.
So I call that the lurch position. So you see that person kind of like lurch back, and then they fling themselves forward, which honestly is what you're talking about, Max, from a start, is where you kind of had that lurch back and then pew, right, slingshot out. See, and this is where I hesitate even using drop step specifically, but you're exactly correct with Nick. How I would articulate a drop step specifically would be where your body is oriented in your upper body more than likely is oriented in a direction to where you cannot from that point generate appropriate or high power output from that position. So your body drops to reorient itself to then be explosive from that position. A plyo step, what I would say, is more so you're in a good position, but your lower body is going to, it's a really quick and aggressive, powerful drop step where that leg kicks back to boom, generate power. Now, you'll see it a lot. I would say more so in people whenever you're going forward. Generally, whenever we go lateral, we use the term pop, push, open, push. It's not a Jake thing. Lee Taft, he's one of the most famous sprint and speed coaches out there in the human performance world. But push, open, push on that front leg. So it's different. It's not a plyo step. You're generating power and putting your body in a more advantageous position to generate higher power output. So it's really hard to articulate verbally. I guess this is something you have to kind of see. But when you ask that question, I would say most people see a plyo step and how they kind of visualize it as a drop step. But so everyone's listening before someone comes after me, like they're not the same. I would agree with that. I'm just saying if you're trying to visualize it, that's probably the best we can do at this moment kind of concept. So anyway, from an exit, I would say that there's what you asked me. I think if you can, the goal, right, is to maximize power output with the most efficient movement that you can, efficient mechanics. And I say that very specifically because sometimes efficient is a drop step. Your body's not in a good position. So to be more efficient, you have to change where you're at. Again, known versus unknown, right? Ideally, we're going to be in that when shooting starts, you're going to drop down probably naturally to that fight stance. Okay. Well, from there, we want our body to understand what right is. If we have a bunch of extraneous movement from there, kind of what you were talking about, Max, in shuffling your feet around and trying to re-identify where's my body supposed to be, that's a problem. So that's generally how I look at the exit, the exit. The entry is way more complex, as you both know. Not everybody. There are multiple different techniques out there, especially on the competition side, that I'm not as familiar with. Like kind of when you and Joe were like, "Hey, which one?" And I'm like, "Yo, y'all are getting outside of my realm." From what I recall, though, I'm pretty sure I was more in line with yours, Nick, wasn't I?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm gonna say that anyway.
Yeah.
But
we're gonna say it because Joe's not here to defend himself. But no, that is a much more technical process, and that is more technique driven, in my opinion. I would say this is one of those times where I am going to very much more default to the principle based, if you want to call it that, versus the technique of trying to identify which technique is better. I think that just like everything else, I think we have to look at it and say, like, what's my body type? What am I good and or bad at? Would I rather see the dot tracking upwards or coming across? Which one do I train? I don't know. I think there's a lot of things on the competition side. For me, whenever we teach a entry or a deceleration, I don't use entry as much in the tactical world because that's not how they see it, and or people freak out and they're like, that's a competition thing.
It's
and I'm gamer. Like, okay, well, I know exactly where I'm like, really, no, you're just entering that position, whatever position you want to shoot somebody or whatever, right? So generally we try to focus on, again, we go, the visual prioritization comes in. So as I'm entering that position, as soon as my deceleration starts, how I articulate it is like on your Uber ride, you have now arrived at that position. Don't worry about your Uber driver getting you there anymore. Now start looking out the door to figure out what your next steps are. So in the movement side on an entry, as soon as I start decelerating, now my brain, I shift and I start finding that target and building the process to shoot sooner, right? Because hopefully I've been coming in really fast up to that point, appropriately fast. Now I want to be on the gun sooner. So visual prioritization, I start shifting. Additionally, this is where mechanics come in. Are you on your heels? Are you on your toes? Are you flat-footed? And understanding which one of those work for you, because again, not everybody is the same. Some people say come in on your toes. Some people say to come in on your heels. I would say generally it's more of a flat foot. Heel is a straight deceleration move, right? Whereas toes, you're not getting a bunch of bite, and you have a much better chance of, you're putting a lot of surface area as you're driving, or sorry, much less surface area with a lot of force. You have a much better chance of slipping. So generally we try to say flat feet, understanding, sinking your hips under. Whereas like in a natural athletic position, like a football players are coming in to make a tackle, they're going to kind of shift their chest forward, right? Your hips are not coming under you as much as they are kind of sitting back in that chair. In the shooting world, that makes it very difficult because my eyes and my gun both dip down if I do that. So our hips to come under, so our chest comes up, so I can see and start building that connection on the gun. Additionally, obviously, we want appropriate deceleration, so that throttle as we're entering, so that per my skill level, that I can see a quieter dot to shoot sooner, right? So I may be, fast as Usain Bolt, but once I get there, if I'm not stopping appropriately, I'm going to make all that time back. Sorry, I'm going to lose all that time that I gained by trying to quiet the dot to where I feel comfortable to shoot. Now, I'm not telling people to enter that position slower, but start your deceleration earlier. And then this is where that other piece of the Venn diagram, the shooting has to be in the background, and you need to train that piece of shooting an uncomfortable dot. I think the entry is one that, in terms of how do I know it's working, as both of you obviously know, the entry is so complex because there's so many different variables. Is it partial? Is it an open? In the tactical world, is there a visual barrier? Are you working on cover, off cover? Is it there's just so many variables. I think that's really hard to articulate. I'll make a little pitch. Like when we built our T drill, and I'm kind of joking because I really don't care if people go run our T drill, but I think we did a good job of building a test, if you want to call it that. It's just a validation of like, I don't train that drill, but it's a good one to be like, it is very movement heavy. To find out how your entries and exits are, you can't pass it if you have good entries and exits, unless you have good entries and exits. So to go just like kind of use it as a find out where you are, we have a lot of really good data on it. And I think it's one of those ones of like, you need to find something that's going to challenge your movement, not just your shooting. I think a lot of people go and say, oh, that's a movement drill. I'm like, you shoot 100 rounds and you're only moving 10 yards. That's not a movement drill, guy, just because you're moving, right? And so I think that in terms of like, is it working? You need to have something that you're going and testing against. Objective data is the only way to know, is it working? Now, from that, you start looking for efficiencies to shave it down. And I think that's where our class kind of comes in. But sorry, I know that you asked a question. There's a lot there, but did I answer some of it at least?
Yeah, for sure. I guess the question was like, hey, what do people need to look for in their own training in terms of that stuff? But I think that was good.
I think the other piece is like you just got to move. I guess that's my thing is so many people go to the range and they shoot doubles. I'm not knocking doubles. I shoot doubles. I think doubles is a great drill. I'm just saying if you go and do that and then you go and you start moving at a match and you're like, man, I can't figure out why I shoot amazing doubles all the way out to 500 yards. And then it's like, okay, well, if you have never moved, that's a whole new motor pattern. That's new input into the gun that you've never challenged. So one of it's, you just got to go move, right? Then you have to start looking at the mechanics that go into play. I'm not saying that other people don't teach that because I do. I'm sure that I know you as an example, and I'm assuming both of you. I know you have your entry because you've described it to me. Okay.
Yep.
So at least there is a starting point to go start playing with how you enter a position, right? So I think you just have to objectively go look at it and say, is it or is it not working? I don't want to jump ahead, or if this is the time you want me to do it, but this is where I would say the movement piece outside of a gun in your hand is important, right?
Yep.
So I think all these people have these expectations, and I'm not going to say who it is, but I had a very, very high level shooter talk about another high level shooter. High level, so we're all on the same page, GMs. And I was talking about movement, and I was like, hey, I think it's super important that you're moving outside of with a gun in your hand. And they were like, well, he's just such a high level shooter. His training on movement is when he's training on the range. I just don't agree with that. I think that Tom Brady, whatever athlete you want to say,
Mm-hmm.
the greatest quarterback of all time, if Tom Brady or not, I give two shits, but I'm just saying that he's the example I use. Tom Brady didn't just work on his movement when he was out on the football field with his receivers throwing passes, right? He trained it in a gym. He trained it without a ball in his hand, training with a ball in his hand, dry fire, like just repping it, to static, to rolling out on air, to rolling out on 7-on-7, to against the scout team, to a game before he got to the Super Bowl. But for some reason, I've heard in the tactical industry, even in the competition space, people are like, "Oh, I train it on the range. I train it in my dry fire." And I'm like, every other professional sport, that is not what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And so for some reason, I get it. You're God's gift to earth at a gun, and you're the GM of GMs, but I'll argue it all day, every day. I just do not agree. You're limiting your performance. I don't care how good you are.
Chances are that
to
guy
say.
is not the GM of GMs. But
Probably not.
anyway.
What's interesting for me, the movement for me is one thing where, dry fire, anything with a gun, especially now, I can diagnose a lot of what I'm doing with the gun through what I'm seeing, through the optic, yada, yada, yada. Movement for me is one thing where the only way I can diagnose what I'm doing is by videotaping it and watching it. It's something where I feel like if I am not videotaping it, I can pat myself on the back and say I did a good job because the dot arrived, where I wanted it to arrive. But I'm diagnosing the gun. I'm not diagnosing the movement. And then when I watch it back, even when I'm not getting objective data, like timing it, if I'm dry firing it in the basement or something, I don't see in the video what I thought I was seeing in my head, right? Like I'm visualizing something that's not actually happening.
Yeah.
And the only way I've been able to diagnose it is through video. I mean, even in matches, I start out a stage and tell myself, all right, get low, stay low through this whole stage. And by the end, I'm like, shit, yeah, I did it. I landed with my knees bent. Like that was great. And then I watch it back and I'm 6'3", and I went through the whole stage at about 6'3". Like, like it's something where I'm not able to be honest with myself about that, probably because I don't have the tools to diagnose it myself, because I don't do it as much. But it's something where if I don't isolate it and videotape it and watch it back and try and fix the things in real time, I'm not going to get there.
I think it takes that maturity, right? Not like usual person, but like motor maturity. The same, it applies for the movement and the shooting, right? Like Nick, both of y'all, but Nick is where mine went through, like, especially on the rifle. How many times students probably aren't doing it, but go out to 50, 75 and rip doubles predictive, right? Mm-hmm. And you're just like, I am so amazing. And then as soon as you think of literally like one small thing, and all of a sudden that mount goes and you're like, right? Mm-hmm. I think that there's those pieces of, like, for me, or at least where I'm at in my shooting journey, within a 2-year window, that like I still have those pieces. Whereas like as I'm listening to you, I can, as soon as my body does something so minute, I can feel it immediately. And I'm like, and I can objectively look and be like, see that round right there? As soon as that mechanic, whatever it may be, and I'm obviously making this up, but I'm just saying, like, I can feel it immediately. And I understand we all have different gifts and different things we put time and train into. And so I think that's why it's so important to me that, again, we have a speed and power program, a 10-week program that we push out. That has been one of our biggest sellers, because people are like, holy shit, like movement. It's like got a program built around just movement. And it's like, yeah, dude, like that's what most of the competition world should be doing, frankly. Like I literally don't give 2 rips if either one of you two can deadlift 700 pounds. Like that is, I would say, useless unless Nick is picking up his horses to shoe them. Like that just does, like, I don't care about that. But there's a lot of other things that I'd be like, hey, I guarantee you I can make you a better shooter in the competition world, right? Like there's not a single person that I've ran across that will absolutely just dust me. Like I don't deserve to be on the same range. That I'm like, I can still make you better though. It's how are we continue to optimize our performance. And I think those motor patterns and the awareness of what you're talking about, Max, of, yeah, dude, that's super important. Of the biofeedback one for what you're talking about, of like to see it and be like, okay, well, now you have to choose to like consciously on the next one, be like, dude, I got to let the shooting just like completely go subconscious and all I'm going to do is stay low. Right. And I think that we're all at different points of our shooting journey, to whereas like mine's on the reverse side, right? Like I said, I'll be like, I am so amazing. And then I think about one thing. I actually did this. Y'all think this is kind of funny. I did this demo for a class, one of the federal units that's a pretty known unit that is, they were pretty good. And I was shooting doubles, and I can't remember where I was shooting from, but I want to say either 25 or 50. And I did the demo 8 rounds, and I was like, oh, I'm just sitting there thinking, I was like, I just F these dudes up. Like there's nobody's gonna be close. And one of the guys goes, hey, can you just help me understand, like, how much of a break do you want in between the pairs? And I was like, oh yeah, I got you. And dude, I go up there and all I was thinking about was, hey, I'm going to go 1, 2, break longer than I normally do. 1, 2. And y'all both know exactly what happened. I went, boom, bam. Like, I mean, I shot it in the crotch. And then I was like, break. And I went, boom, boom, straight to the face. And I was like, I literally was like, oh, this is bad. You know? And so
not like that, but
yeah,
make
so
it sound like that.
But don't do what I just did. But there's your gap. No, but it was one of those moments where I was able to be like, hey, in all seriousness, this is a good teaching point, right? Like as soon as your brain thinks about something completely different, like this is where this drill is so important to be like hyper focused in. But it was one of those ones where I was like, gosh, damn it. Like I felt so amazing. And then as soon as my brain went somewhere else, it was just like came crumbling down. Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just one of those things. It just takes time. And I think time, reps, and very specific focus and awareness.
Yeah. All right. So I think the day we'll take a little turn here from kind of what we've been talking about. At least I think so. So I think the days of going to, say, nationals or a major match, for just as an example, right, and being fat and out of shape and winning are over. I think those days are long gone. When I went to nationals, it was pretty eye-opening to see some of especially the super squad, the guys at the very, very top. I mean, I'm not saying that they look like bodybuilders, but like these dudes were clearly very, very athletic.
Yeah.
So are there some workouts that you would recommend? Like, hey, I want to go get better at USPSA or shooting, shooting sports, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Are there workouts that could be maybe specific to that?
Yep, absolutely. So I do want to clarify on that statement. I can't remember his name, and I'm not trying to like throw shade or be mean at all. I'm sure he's a really nice. I literally don't know him at all, but there is a guy that I've seen on social media that he's pretty heavy gentleman, but he's an amazing shooter. Multiple you guys, I don't know if you specifically, but some of the guys, Matt, different guys I've seen share his stuff, but he moves amazing, right? He's a big boy. I care less about the aesthetic piece, the image, right? What I would say, but I agree with you because I know that the what's the word I'm looking for? I know what you're talking about. Like that was one of the big arguments from the tactile community for a long time, right? Oh, you see all those fat guys out there that don't move around, that's the only reason they're good at, kind of thing.
I would always answer that with like, yeah, that fat guy could probably beat you, right?
Yeah, like he would dust you. Like
you're saying that he's fat and you could beat him, but you can't.
Right.
So shut that down immediately.
Yeah. So here's where I come in, and this is I did this in the special operations community. Not all teams are created equal. Not all teams more so do not have the same mission capabilities. Some of them say that they do, but whenever I first came into the industry, I would ask a team like, what do you do? And they'd be like, oh, we do this, this, and this. And then I'd say, okay, let's objectively go look at what you did last year, the last 5 years. I get it that y'all are SEALs and y'all are maritime and y'all do a lot, but really, y'all been in Afghanistan with zero water and y'all been doing a lot of CQB. And that's a very low hanging fruit. I'm not knocking them. I'm just saying as an example, right? When I look at the tactical industry, I more so need to be like, what is it that you want to do? Like, what is your goal? Any good strength and conditioning coach is going to ask you that. And if they don't, and they're just like, this is for you. And my first question is going to be, interesting. Please enlighten me. Why is this for me? Do you know something that I don't know? What is my goal? I don't know what my goal is. So right? So I think, is there a good program? I don't want to say that there's not, but I think that one of the things I will say in the competition space, I have not seen somebody like Full Send build something for the competition world. I've had a couple of GMs reach out that are very much wanting programming from us, and we are starting to develop. And so maybe there is something in the works there, Nick. You stole my thunder. No, I'm just kidding. But no, I think in the competition world, you got to look at like, what is your goal? What is it that you're wanting to do? Now, yes, I do think there's some very good things. I care less about the aesthetics piece, but when you look at competition movement, right? Or when you look at competition, again, I care less about strength unless it's limiting your speed and power. So if you don't have enough strength to do that, that's a problem, and or stability. So strength, less so care about. What I do very much care about is stability, shooting from awkward positions and being able to maintain and hold, your ability to move and move well. I say mobility, but to me, that means a different word. A lot of people say mobility and they mean movement. Mobility to me is like, do you have a range of motion limitation, right? I do think both are important in that sport. I've seen some of you guys like have to shoot matches where you have to squat down and shoot through a very small port, like ass to grass. Well, if you have a limitation, you can't do that. Okay, well, that's either going to allow you not to be able to shoot through that port, and or your stability in that position is going to be very, very poor. So there's that piece, but obviously my biggest one is the movement. So Max, just kind of what you're talking about, I feel pretty confident. If you got on, like, as an example, just even it's not designed for that, but it could definitely be used, our speed and power program, we have so much movement in there. Your body awareness and your movement maturity, you're going to start feeling things that you're like, ooh, I can figure out where I can be more efficient, shave time, gain time, etc. Whereas I think so much of what I've seen in the industry, maybe I should say, and again, I'm not an expert in it, it is very experiential based. It's, this worked for me, so I'm going to do that and explore that. I'm not saying that's wrong, but what I'm saying is if you don't have the knowledge on this other option that is even available over here, maybe that's better for you. You just didn't know any better. You just fell in that other one first. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean,
So,
like,
go ahead.
I don't know. I always think about it. Tiger Woods is my favorite example, right? It's kind of the same thing. Golf was for a long time fat guys out there smoking cigarettes and drinking a bunch, and they are icons, American icons.
That one can still do it.
Don't get me wrong, icons. But Tiger Woods is the first guy that showed up who, strength and condition training, cross training, and treated it like a sport and changed the game. And now you see the guys who are at the top who all look like him. They all strength train, they're all doing conditioning, 100%. And it's a very different sport. And I was guilty of it. I mean, I'm 35. I hadn't lifted a weight until November of last year. Like, I just didn't do it. I didn't need to, didn't feel like I needed to. I've had an active lifestyle, but I started to notice shooting, I wasn't performing where I wanted to. And I just started a basic lifting program, right? Like I do some cardio, but just basic lifting program. I've been doing it for a year now, and it has made an incredible difference in my shooting, movement, the whole shebang. And it's not even something I paid attention to, right? It wasn't focused on shooting. It wasn't focused on any particular sport. It was just a very basic lifting program. And it has made a incredible difference in my core strength, to your point, in awkward stances and explosive movement, in just my, how long I can stay active on a course of fire. I'm not ending up in a long field course. I'm not at the end, breathing hard and feeling like I need to go sit down. So I think, even just from a general conditioning standpoint, it has made a huge difference in my life, and it wasn't focused. So I think, Jake, you're probably right. There's probably a gap there for somebody to develop something specific to the training industry, but even just a basic, conditioning, I think goes a long way. I am interested 100%. Though. I'm gonna have to look up that 10-week movement course, because that's something again where like I haven't. It's just been like give me the techniques. Yeah. I can move, right. I'm not the fastest guy, but like I can make it happen. So something focused, I think would be a huge benefit.
So we saw this in the tactical industry with CrossFit specifically. So to get a little nerd here on you, you guys. So there's GPP and SPP. So GPP is general physical preparedness, literally what you're talking about, Max, of like you just got on a program to feel better, in better shape. CrossFit is the GPP of all time, right? I'm not knocking CrossFit. What I'm saying is it's really good for whether you're a soccer mom, you're a dad bod guy, whether you're whatever, it puts you in great shape, right? In a plethora of categories, but you're not an expert at any one specific thing because you don't need it specifically, right? However, all the top 10 or all the top level CrossFit Games athletes, they're not GPP people. They ain't doing those workouts that they're at the random box or the WODs at the box, like the local gym, right? They are doing SPP, specialized or specific physical preparedness. What is the end goal? I'm in generally good health. What things do I start changing my programming to be good at this? So like in the example you just gave, Max, yours is GPP. There's nothing wrong with that. And when you say conditioning and you talk about like, I got to the end and I'm not having to sit down and I'm breathing hard. That's how most people perceive it of like, that's how I know I'm not. Hang on, no. Let's go way more detailed, right? Y'all two are the exact same training schedule, exact same shooters. You are a little more conditioned is the word I'm going to use than Nick is. Your brain and the intensity of when I go to take that shot, okay, like your brain may not have to think about it specifically, but both of y'all, the brain's like, damn. Nick's is like, damn, I'm having to work a little harder, where Max, yours is like, hey, I'm good. I can still focus on the trigger or whatever it may be, right? And I think that's what I struggle with sometimes is people are like, well, I'm not breathing hard. I'm like, dude, that is one symptom at the very end, but all this in between that you're not aware of that's going on, like that's the problem. That's where you could be so much better. And I think so many people get complacent and they're like, well, I'm not breathing hard at the end, so I'm good. And it's like, dude, how good do you want to be though, right? Yeah. Like Tom Brady could go play that sport and not breathe hard, quote unquote.
Dude, I almost think the opposite. Like if I get done with this stage and I'm not breathing hard, I probably didn't push hard enough.
Yeah. Sure. What's funny is like what part of what spurred it on was, Nick, for instance, in his previous life as a horseshoer, as a farrier, he still has forearms the size of my neck, like truly. And like, I think, Nick, I'm not speaking on a turn here to say like that has played a significant role in not making you a better shooter, but allowing you to work on grip things that I said I had office hands, right? I've had an office job forever. I had office hands. I had office arms. I had to your point, Jake, I had to pay a lot more attention to things in my grip and things that would be helped with forearms like Nick had that he didn't have to think about, right?
Sure.
And so I identified that as something like, okay, like I need to fix that, not so that I can change myself and make myself a better shooter, but so that I don't have to be thinking about like, how hard am I gripping? Why is this killing my forearm? Where I can just start thinking about things as principles, right? Not thinking about.
I was just about to say, this is where the principles comes into it, right? Because we are all built differently, even outside of the shoeing. Like, this is what I tell people, just genetically, we are all built different. Like it, love it, hate it. Unfortunately, the cold hard truth is we're just genetically, we're all different, right? I don't know either one of you's full background, but like my brother who played in the NFL, probably is going to beat y'all in a foot race, right? Like genetically, we're all built differently, right? But that said, to this example, like Nick, yeah, maybe the background in shoeing, but genetically, he's built different. That's why
He's a
principals.
stocky Italian guy.
Yeah, he's a stocky Italian guy, right? No, it's yeah. But so it's one of those things where I think this is where programming gets difficult, right? And this is what we kind of run into even with special operations units. It's the cleanest dirty shirt model when you build a program. I need to look and understand what the task is and the goal, and I've got to build that as best I can, where all three of us that are built genetically different are going to benefit from it. However, we're going to see gains in probably different areas, whereas it's not all three of us are just going to go on the same program and see the exact same thing because we're all different, right? And so I think that's where it's important of separating out from GPP and saying, okay, now that I'm in generally good health, what program is going to really help me for competition shooting? How is that different than how I prepare for a special operations person, right? In CQB, because they are different, right? I hope in USPSA, it would make it really sporty, but when you come around a barricade, then all of a sudden someone's standing there and you might have to go hands-on with them. It would drastically change the sport, right? Or they are going to just like punch you in the face, right? Whereas like in the special operations community, that is a very possible real concept that you have to go hands-on with somebody. And so I think understanding how do we build those programs, I think that's where we've tried to hang our hat. That's why we don't program for football players, soccer moms. It's for the shooting community. And obviously I'm biased, but I think we've done a pretty good job at it.
Super cool. This was good.
Yeah, man. I enjoyed it. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. Where can people find you? So say they want to go take a class, or maybe they want to host you,
or do that 10-week program.
Or do the 10-week program.
Yeah, so I'm assuming there might be somewhere we can put the link, but inextremisperformance.com is our website. So that's where you can go. We've got our live courses. We've got our online programs there. We've got so I guess we can all be on the same page. We've got a speed and power program that's 10-week. We have a strength program that's 10-week, and we have a capacity. So if you're like, hey, I don't want to say I'm not a believer in it because there's time and place if you're a marathoner, but it's more so that anaerobic endurance. How hard can I work for what duration of time versus just like a sub-max effort for a very, very long amount of time. I would say more so than not in the tactical world, that's what's used. And especially that's what's used in the shooting community. So we have those 3 10-week programs, but then we have a program that's like 7 days a week, 365 that you can go on, pay your monthly subscription and get that for all time. So all of that's on our website, inextremisperformance.com. You can find us on social media, on Instagram specifically. INEXT Performance is our Instagram handle. So you can find us on there. I think we do a pretty good job. Just to clarify, I do not do anything on social media. So if you reach out to us, it's one of our guys. He is an absolute god at social media. He does a really, really good job of putting out, in my opinion, videos that resonate and or people can digest very well.
They are pretty cool. There's a lot of tracking feature going on.
Dude, he's a beast at that. Is that not super cool? Dude, I saw that video and I was like, this is amazing. Like he's really good at it. He's actually a SWAT guy up here in the Dallas area. And yeah, he's a beast. He's done a good job. But it's actually been really cool too, because he's actually through this process, I've seen him really his verbiage change and like the copy and different things to where he's understood and really dove in as an expert, in my opinion, to like understand shooting, to then be able to write that copy and understand what he's looking at in the video to break it out. It's been cool to see his progression too, but he's an absolute beast. Tactical bus driver, I believe is his handle. Chris Quaw, I want to give him a shout out. Love the dude. He's a good friend too. But anyway, you can find our Instagram on there. We put out a lot of information. We really try to, a lot of the stuff we're talking on about entries, exits, and just human performance in general, try to put it there. So yeah, those are the main places I would say you can find us. And if you want to contact us about things in terms of classes, either message us on social media or there's a place on our website. Full transparency, 95 to 99% of our classes are classes that agencies are bringing us in, and that they're closed classes. We don't do a lot of open enrollment. I don't have anything against it. The very large majority of our classes are like, hey, we've got 20, 30 people from this agency and they bring us out. So if you're law enforcement, especially, let us know. That's what we deal with most. But at the same time, like, we're always down to hold open enrollment classes, and we get that request a lot. And so I think we're getting closer to that. I think it was kind of tough early on in my career because with all the movement stuff we're doing, I at least had a starting point with law enforcement of what they knew safety wise. So I could kind of be like, all right, here's the bare minimum that I can expect, right? Whereas open enrollment, as I've heard from a lot of you guys, you get a plethora of different skills. And I was just not ready for that with all the movement that we do, to be like, I don't want to get shot potentially. So I just stuck with closed classes. So, but yeah, those are the places that you can find us.
Very cool. Awesome,
Yeah.
man. Thank you again for coming on.
Yeah, thanks guys. Enjoyed it.
Jake, it was good meeting you.
Yeah, man. Nice meeting you.